Greetings and welcome everyone to the E.V.I.L Essentials video from the Angry Chicken for Chapter 3 of the Dalaran Heist. I'm Garrett, here as always with Jocelyn. You can typically find us talking everything Hearthstone over on the Angry Chicken podcast, where new episodes get posted every Tuesday. But Joss, we are here, I would like to say to knock over the fruit cart, but we can't. It's really stuck to the ground.
Yes, they are impervious.
Dalaran is a pretty large, regal, floating city. It's very, one might say, ostentatious, but clearly the city planners didn't want to widen the roads or think about their road planning too much because these roads are narrow, they're full of carts, and here we are only being able to put down 4 minions while we're trying to cause mayhem and steal everything that Dalaran has to offer.
Exactly. And like we mentioned, they are impervious, which means that no matter what you do to your board, whether you are brawling or stormbringing or anything, you can't get rid of them. So there's no way to free up your board space, which is really something to keep in mind when you're trying to build your deck.
And we'll get more into that in a second, but let's talk about the first new thing that us henchmen are going to see when we log into to Chapter 3, which at the time of recording this has been out for less than 24 hours. I've managed to get quite a few runs in, but as you have informed me, there's already a couple bosses I still haven't seen. But the first thing we see when we get into Chapter 3 is that we have access to 2 new heroes. There's still the same 3 heroes that were available last week in Chapter 1 and 2, but with Chapter 3 unlocking, we now have access to Krasiki, the Arakoa priest, and Captain Eudora, the Volpera rogue, whom I imagine, if you spend any time on the internet and have the same fondness for adorable little fluffy animals that most of us do, you probably tried Eudora first just based on the fact that she's a frickin' pirate fox person.
Well, I did go in order. So I did priest first, but I did priest first and very badly and only beat 2 bosses. And then I went over to rogue and then I got much, much further. So Volpera was my happy place.
Okay, you had the exact opposite experience that I did because I went rogue first. I took Eudora out for a spin and promptly got aced. And I was like, okay. Well, let me go see what this Arakoa is all about. Just full swept. I had a great time on the priest. I had a lot of fun. Well, stealing minions, because you can only play so many of them. Mind control is worth quite a bit, I think, in this run through, and that's kind of what I went in with. But let's actually talk about the strategy of playing through the streets of Dalaran. As we previously mentioned, the twist with this chapter is the carts. We are here on the narrow streets of Dalaran, where also apparently there are people selling their wares constantly, all the time, off of carts that you cannot interact with. Lucky for us, this also affects the bosses that are going to be barring our path. They're going to stop us from trying to get down the streets of Dalaran. So at the very least, it's a double-edged sword for sure.
Yeah, it's really nice that the negative things that impact you in terms of board space also impact your opponent. And one thing that I found once I started playing was that using the carts properly was very, very important. They are non-targetable. They don't have health. They don't have attack, which means that they can be used to disrupt abilities of bosses that otherwise you wouldn't be able to. Because one of the really interesting things about the Dalaran heist is that there are some bosses that carry through from week to week. So you do have kind of a general pool of bosses that you can pull from. So some of them I knew from last week's chapters. For instance, I was playing up against one of the rogues and I know that they have betrayal, which meant I could this week use carts to put carts in between my minions. And then I was basically immune to betrayal. Positioning becomes very, very important in this chapter. When
I first saw the carts there, I was like, oh, okay, if I'm going through on Shaman, I'm just going to have to make sure my Flame Tongue Totem can get to my other minions. But I don't think I've seen the rogue that has Betrayal, or if I have, I haven't seen it since the carts have shown up. That's a really smart way to use that.
Yeah, there's a couple. I mean, there's also effects like Cone of Cold, but basically anything that involves targeting a minion, even Meteor, because we should also remind everybody that wild cards are present in the Dalaran heist, which means that you have to keep in mind all of those different positioning, targeting spells, like Meteor.
Yeah, because I went in and I was like, oh, Rogue. And I was like, oh, wait, but Rogue they got some nerfs. I was a little concerned. I'm like, wait, no, never mind. We have access to wild cards. Rogue's going to be just fine. There's so many great cards. And if you're like me and you have a lot of nostalgia because you've been playing Hearthstone for a while, that's something I found I've really enjoyed about the Dalaran heist, is seeing all these old cards pop up outside of Wild or Arena right now. Really like that. Good job. Anyways, back to the strategy of dealing with these cards. So my strategy immediately became go for big stats. That was just the first thing that popped into my head, was just draft as many big things as I possibly could and hope that I found some of the treasures that would allow me to discount the costs of those larger minions. And it didn't always happen. And there's certainly other ways to get through this chapter, normal or heroic. But going for big stats worked out really well for me. So much so that when I went into test heroic, and I'm going to be honest, I went in there just to get some footage for this video. I'm like, I'm going to go in, I'm just going to dip my toe in it, see how hard heroic is. I ended up full clearing on my second try just on accident. I just went with like, I'll just take what I can get to discount my minions and just draft all the biggest stuff that I can.
There's a couple of different ways to discount your minions with those treasures. There's Togwaggle's dice.
Togwaggle's dice are loaded with bad mojo.
But there's also the Scepter of Summoning, which is anything that is over a cost of 5, or any minions over the cost of 5. They are brought down to 5 mana, which is just another great way. That, and there's robes as well, right?
Which I hadn't seen.
Cost.
Yeah, I had not seen until this week. So I was like not sure if there were some treasures that were also getting added to the pool or not. I haven't been able to confirm that.
Half-cost robes were actually available in chapters 1 and 2 of the Dalaran heist. I managed to get them last week, and actually combining them with the Scepter of Summoning was able to get some of my 10-cost cards for 2 mana because it doesn't round up. So anything that costs 5 is then halved again with the robes, meaning it then costs 2. It's insane.
Yeah, it's absolutely bonkers. So you got lucky. So it's called the Robes of Gaudiness, by the way, and I can't wait to see someone cosplaying this at the next BlizzCon. But this was the first time I saw them, and it half costs your card, but there is a catch. The catch is you can only play 2 cards a turn if you draft the Robes of Gaudiness, and I could totally see in the other chapters that being a drawback. But here in chapter 3, when you can only have 4 minions on the board anyway, it doesn't really feel like much of a drawback at all, especially if you can draft a big deck. And that kind of brings me to what I'm calling Bob strategy. What should you be thinking of when you go see Bob at whatever tavern? Bob seems to own literally every tavern in Dalaran, and Dalaran appears to like their beverages.
Yeah, I have still never gotten anyone but Bob.
Anyways, back to the strategy that I deployed for both my clears of just drafting large. When I got to Bob, I was like, okay, it's all about just cutting out my little boys. Any of the little minions that I could, that would show up, and if I had the cards that would allow me to remove cards from my deck, I was just purging any of the low-cost minions that I could. And if I couldn't get rid of a low-cost minion, then my low-cost minions were getting the buffs for the rest of the run.
Fair enough. I think that getting rid of your smaller minions is a really good strategy if you have like the dream of the half-cost Robes of Gaudiness along with, Scepter of Summoning, or any kind of combination of ways to make your minions cheaper. But I find that if you don't, then like you said, Garrett, one of the better things to look for is the ability to buff your minions by +2/+2 without actually increasing the cost. Because there's also a +4/+4 buff that will increase your cost by 2. So if you can manage to get the +2/+2 with no increased cost on some of your 1 and 2 cost cards, then you're going to get a tempo advantage very quickly, and you can kind of go from there. Another thing that I found with really, it's hard to talk about Bob without talking about the treasures, because his cards can also impact your treasures. So if for instance, you've chosen a treasure spell, it might be a good idea to, do something like roll the dice and see if you can make your treasure cost 0, or see if you can reduce the cost of your spell by 3. I can't remember exactly what that Bob Tavern card is called, but there is one to reduce the cost of a spell as well. So keeping your treasures in mind, as well as potentially re-rolling your side of the board in the tavern to try to pull your treasure if you have chosen a minion. If you can get one of Bob's buffs onto your minions, that's going to be good every single time, because the treasures themselves are already powerful. Obviously, they're treasures.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wouldn't shy away from the +4/+4 if you're having the cost of your minions, because it pretty much negates that 2 mana increase penalty. So yeah, all of these. And again, there's so many other ways to strategize to play around this and win this. I'm sure there's like heavy burn spell builds you could go
That's
for.
the way I went, was the heavy spells, because that's kind of thing. Okay, I can't have minions, or I don't have room for a whole bunch of minions. Therefore, how do I play around decreased board space? Lean into the spell route. The only thing I will say is I found in my runs anyways, is that when I was trying to go down the spell route, that was actually very, very difficult. A lot of what you're offered tends to be at most 2 spells in a minion. You very rarely get offered 3 spells all in one bucket. So I did find it quite hard. So I was taking, like primordial glyphs and spell slingers and like things to give me like random spells, hoping to find that burn. So I would say in this case, the better route to potentially take is go for the big boys and the mana cost discounts for getting around the carts in the streets of Dalaran.
And let's talk about the bosses, because we saw some new ones, or if they did pop up in other chapters, we haven't seen them until now. We've seen Applebow, the tree who sells apples.
Applebow is a fruit vendor and a tree. That's weird, right? It's not just me.
Does he grow the apples and then sell you pieces of his self? Like it's weird, you guys. It's weird.
I mean, he looks like a treant. He might just be a druid who prefers to stay in tree form. Just prefers to do that. Also is very passionate about apples. Appleball was fun. I really enjoyed fighting against Razzle Fireborn. It's this Blood Elf painter themed boss that his hero power is to just spend all of the mana available to him and then summon a random minion of the same cost. But did you see the painting effects? It's so pretty.
I knew that you would pick up on the artist boss of all of the potential bosses, that would be the one that would resonate with you. I really like this boss too. And at first I was like, oh man, he's going to be so overpowered. But again, since we're pulling from the entirety of Wild, there are so many potential bad outcomes to spending all your mana on any given turn that I actually found him to be pretty balanced.
Now, you went up against a final boss that I did not see. I made it to the final boss, I want to say about pretty sure 4 times, and it was Geppetto Joybuzz every single time. So we'll talk about him in a minute, because you also fought against Geppetto Joybuzz. But I want to hear about Captain Hannigan, because I haven't run into this boss.
Right. So Captain Hannigan is another one that is obviously unique to this chapter and has therefore the same type of restriction put on him in the, board space, which is a really, really good thing, because much like Razzle Fireborn, he has the potential to get way out of control. He has a hero power, Raise the Alarm, which summons a 1/4 Kirin Guard. Doesn't sound too bad, right? Kirin Guard, it's probably a 1/4 with taunt or something like that. Oh no, they are 1/4 Kirin Guards, no taunt, which means he also has a deck full of taunts, making them much, much harder to attack with your own minions. And they have text that reads that they gain +1 attack for every other Kirin Guard. And this is an automatic hero power that costs him no mana, which means every single turn you're going to have to deal with a new 1/4. And then when the second one spawns, then you have 2 2/4s, and then 3 3/4s, and then 4 4/4s, assuming he hasn't filled up his board with taunts or you haven't killed them. So there's a couple of different ways to play against him. You could let him fill up his board, and so he doesn't have space to summon any more guards, because he will play taunt minions. He will play Goldshire Footman even. So something like Goldshire Footman is much better than a Kirin Guard that's going to grow every turn. You can do that, or you can basically try to clear them every turn, which in the early game is very, very, very difficult.
Well, I look forward to running into him at some point. I want to fight this boss. Sounds hard, because
you should keep him in mind for sure when you're building your deck. Be like, okay, if I need to clear like 3 3/4s on turn 3, how am I going to go about that?
Yeah, because I felt extremely vindicated in my original strategy of just going big and not going home when I ran into Geppetto Joybuzz, because if you fight him on normal, his hero power is called Assembly. And what happens, it reads, after a player draws a minion, summon a 1/1 copy of it. That's a player. That means also happens to me. So my deck with 3 Ragnaroses is having a great time. And also in the normal run, I also drafted quite a bit of resurrection effects on my priest hero. So these 1/1s are getting spun, and suddenly I'm just like, I'm Barnesing without Barnes. This is so great.
That sounds pretty overpowered.
It was great.
Which is kind of the great thing about playing in the Dalaran Heist, is that a lot of the combinations between the ability to reroll your deck and buff things or recruit different minions through Bob, as well as treasures, which we've seen in adventures past, you get to do some really, really, really powerful things that they just feel so good. And you don't feel as bad when the boss is also doing very powerful things, because then it feels like, at least you're on par.
Absolutely. Now, beware Geppetto on Heroic, because I did make it to him and I did end up clearing Heroic. That hero power of his assembly no longer spawns 1/1s for you, only for Geppetto. Luckily, this was the round where I was able to find the Robes of Gaudiness, so I did just load the board up and did pretty well. Heroic certainly makes bosses harder than before, but that particular change from Geppetto Joybuzz specifically on his hero power makes defeating him Heroic a much more challenging task.
As it should be. I have very much enjoyed having Heroic be available again, because I think that that's one thing that I really enjoyed in Adventures previously, is the ability to challenge myself as a Hearthstone player and try to figure out a way around things to defeat those heroic bosses. So now that they've brought Heroic back in Dalaran Heist, it's actually a ton of fun and it's really challenging. And I've beat Heroic a couple of times now, or from the first couple of wings. I haven't beat the new Heroic wing yet, but it is really challenging and you will lose. And that's good Hearthstone.
Yeah, I've had an absolute blast with it. I mean, I'm definitely converted. As someone who didn't spend a lot of time a single player before, I have been playing a ton of Dalaran Heist, and I already have 2 of 3 Heroics under my belt for these chapters. I still need to get Chapter 2. It's eluding me. I'll get you Chapter 2. That's what I'm going to do this weekend. But there you have it. There's our strategies for Chapter 3 of the Dalaran Heist. So get out there and don't worry about these spender cards. You can get around it, and you can really strategize around it as well and do some still totally busted things and have a good time while doing it. So best of luck to you. If you enjoyed this video, we do a lot more than just talk about PvE content over on the Angry Chicken podcast. New episodes go up every Tuesday, ranging anywhere from 1 hour to 2 hours to help get you through your workday and keep you informed about everything that's currently happening in Hearthstone. So go check it out. It's available wherever podcasts can be found. Jocelyn, where can everybody find you?
You can find me on Twitter and Twitch. I'm at Joss Plays. That's JOCE Plays.
I'm Garrett Art on Twitter, 2 R's and 2 T's in Garrett. Go check it out. Everything else can be found at amove.tv. Job's done.
Job's done.